How did you find that transition, and how did you, let's say, secure your first client? What was the sell?
I thought I knew what I was talking about, and I knew how to do an end-to-end solution.
The smaller companies who can't really afford those global senior supply chain professionals, look for that.
What do you think is going to happen between China and the US?
Find some comfort in discomfort.
If you surround yourself with the right people, you can achieve anything. It's okay to get it wrong, and you will get it wrong.
Welcome to episode 1 of Stacked and Loaded. I'm Simon, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Matt. Matt, why don't you just tell us where it all started on this crazy world of logistics?
Cheers, Simon. So for me, my career in logistics has spanned probably over 15 years now. I started picking and packing on the shop floor, just like many of us did. I started at a company called Delphi. It was automotive car parts, shipping them internationally around the world. From there, I got all my truck licenses, so V&A trained, high bay picker, counterbalance, and sort of progressed my way through. Got put onto a project, which was a WMS implementation project. You know, it would be no surprise to say it was over budget. Timelines were blown out of the water, so they were looking for support to go up there and do some menial tasks, really, to start with. So I jumped on the project, saw some opportunity to learn more, and just tried the best I could, really, to become a sponge and just absorb as much knowledge and expertise as I could.
And so how old were you then when you started? You came straight out of school? Or?
Yeah, so I came out of college. I was playing full-time sport, and when I came out of college, basketball, it will be a no surprise with my height, as you all know. Played basketball for a period of time, and then sort of started in the distribution centre. So I was 18, 19 at the time that I started in a warehouse. And didn't really know anything else. And it was my first full-time job. So it was nice to be paid, to have sort of routine as well. And I could still kind of do my basketball on the side, because most of the training was sort of early mornings or late evenings. So jumped onto the project. We had the go live. I supported that go live, and then over time become a team leader, picked up responsibility for a team of people. And that's where I really started to blend the sort of tech with the operation, and understanding how the tech has to synchronize with the ops, and ops has to synchronize with the tech, because on too many occasions I think they try and fight each other, and that's where we get the problems, and still a lot of the problems that we find today.
Where was that in the sort of the landscape of tech at that point? We used then on RDTs and what we see today is standard. Was that the situation when you first started?
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't remember the paper and the...
Well, we were on an old green screen system at the time, so it was all paper picks, and you had to, you would walk around, you would write on the sort of paper whether you had a mispick, a shortage, an over, and then you would take it back to your team leader at the time, or your admin. They would input that into their system, and then the system would centrally store that data. But yeah, it was very old school. We weren't cloud-based at that time. If it fell over, it fell over properly, and it was all the hardware needed changing or switching out. Yeah. So that's where it really started, and that's how I got then into management, because I then become a shift manager, which then led on to an ops manager position, looking after sort of 20 to 30 people, did night shifts, but really started to get an understanding then of an end-to-end warehouse. So from just being a picker and putting away and driving the trucks, then I was on inbound, then I was on picking, putting away, PIC counting, shipping, all the paperwork that goes with that. And back then, I mean, shipping seems pretty simple compared to what we've got today, and all the complexities with Brexit, which we'll lead on to, I'm sure, at a later date. The de minimis, the stuff that's going on in the US now, things seem very simple when I look back, but it was a great learning curve for me. And then I went from Delphi, and I took a big risk, but I was of the age to take that risk. I was still living at home. I was about 22, I think it was 22, 23. And I went consulting, and I remember it vividly. And, we're going to touch on people a lot, I think, throughout this podcast, because they're the people that really make it happen.
And a moment to acknowledge one of our sponsors. Logictix helps businesses streamline their operations and boost efficiencies with data-driven solutions. Please reach out for your free health check to uncover hidden opportunities to drive savings and performance. You made that sound really easy, just jumping from a shift manager, ops manager position into consultancy, which is normally quite difficult. So how did you find that transition, and how did you, let's say, secure your first client? What was the sell?
I think it's about the people, and I think one of the key things and the key theme that will be throughout this podcast is the people and the people that sit behind business and supply chain specifically. And I think providing you surround yourself with the right people, you can achieve whatever you want. I mean, if I look at my career and we'll touch on yours, I think if we weren't surrounded by the people that we have been surrounded by and fortunate enough to be supported by, we wouldn't be where we are today. So I'm super grateful for that. So it started back to your question. It started with building a relationship with a recruiter. It was a gentleman that won't mind me mentioning his name, a guy called Dan Hayward, and James Gamble as well, very well known within the WMS space and recruitment space. And I remember wanting out and wanting to develop further. I'd had this thirst for knowledge and experience, and that's why I enjoyed the project on the WMS so much. And then I came out and I felt like I was starting to plateau, and I really wanted to make that step change up and challenge myself again. Being the age that I was, I remember James actually ringing me initially and talking to me about what was possible within the consultancy world, within the WMS space. Not that I believed him at the time when he was talking to me about day rates and what was possible. So I remember being on 3 months' notice, which was one of the challenges that the guys told me I had, because they said, look, you're on 3 months' notice. When you go into consultancy, they normally want someone to start pretty quickly. They don't want to wait 3 months for somebody. So I remember taking the leap, talking to my parents, talking it through, talking to a couple of people around me that I was close with from when I started at Delphi. And I took the leap, and I picked the phone up to Dan at the time, and I said, Dan, you've got 3 months to find me a job because I've just handed my notice in. And to be fair to him, he pulled it off, and he rang me back probably a month and a half later, and he said, I've got your first role for you, Matt. Your first role, XPO Logistics would love to talk to you, see what value you can bring there. And that's when they were just starting to go into the sort of dedicated sheds logistics space. They were obviously very, very good and still are at transport, and they were starting to venture into the WMS space and the dedicated sheds. So, cut a long story short, I spoke to the guys at XPO. We bonded. We got on very, very well. They offered me the role as a consultant. It was an initial 6-month contract to go and design, configure the Wyvale Garden Centre solution for those guys. Something I'd never done before. And if I look back now and I think of the risk that I took, I'm not sure I would take a similar risk again.
I think that's always the way, isn't it? Right? You sort of you look back and the world looks a bit more black and white at the time than it does when you look back, and that's always the same with me as well. I think I just want to go back a little bit though. How did you sell yourself to XPO as a WMS expert? Where did that knowledge come from?
Sure, I think I was fortunate, and I mean this in the best way possible. I was fortunate that they didn't know what they were really looking for. I mean, they were supported heavily by XPO Logistics, which is now GXO, and they had their own in-house WMS team. But obviously they were new to it as well. So we kind of just guided each other through that conversation. I told them about my journey, how I had learned along the way, what I had picked up in such a short period of time, and then the things that I had developed and understood within sort of the end-to-end Delphi operation within the automotive space. And obviously, interestingly, and I think it's an interesting conversation these days, because you often get pigeonholed in, you've worked in the automotive industry, so you can only do logistics within that space. You haven't done fashion apparel, or you haven't done beauty and cosmetics or anything like that. So I was quite fortunate, really. They were comfortable for me to go and design a full end-to-end solution, technically within the space of FMCG goods within Wyvale Garden Centre, having come from an automotive background. So we had a few back and forths. And again, it was about the people. We bonded. We had a lot in common. The work ethic was there. The passion was there to get the job done. And I felt that from the day I walked in. I remember walking into the big boardroom table that was there, and it was full of Post-it notes of the operational design. And then I had to complement that with the technical solution and make sure the operation were, agreed to it, were comfortable going with it. And then off we went.
Yeah, I think it's a really brave decision by them. And it's something we've discussed, I know, on a one-to-one level, we've discussed in the past that, that risk of being pigeonholed is quite a big risk. So first of all, taking the risk to get out of where you were, which I think is a very big and brave step, but also for them to take I think the transition from one position to another is relatively easy. We're talking about people and systems and processes. It's relatively the same. Not all people see it in the same way. So I think credit to XPO. I think if you get the right character with someone who's got the right brain, which they obviously thought maybe incorrectly about yourself, I think they've made the right decision, right? They haven't taken someone with a very niche experience. They've gone with the person with the right character and the right, let's say, framework in order to help them expand within the skill set they think that person already has. So I think that's really, really cool. So you started with XPO with the help of James and Dan. Where did it go from there?
Yeah, so I spent my time then at XPO, delivered the solution for YVAL. We moved on to another solution for another company that they won the business for. And then I was fortunate enough to get taken over to the XPO logistics team, which is obviously, as I've said, now GXO Logistics. And I worked within their central IT team. And that was an incredible experience for me because I thought I knew what I was talking about and I knew how to do an end-to-end solution. But when I was then surrounded by these people that had been in the industry for years, it was incredible, absolutely incredible, because I was just learning all the time. And I was on project to project to project, just doing little things from reporting to continuous improvement, to sit in and understanding requirements from the business if they wanted changes and from the customers if they wanted changes, ultimately to benefit the customer. That's what we're all trying to achieve and what we're all striving for in the most efficient and effective way. So that was great. And that's how I ended up at TED. So my contract was coming to an end and they were seeking approval to extend my contract. So in the meantime, the Ted Baker contract, which was their sort of global facility, they were consolidating 13 facilities into one, was in Derby. They just built the facility with the support of GXO and they were about to go live. So they kind of parachuted me in for a bit of support. So I initially went in there and did some report writing, some KPI management, and worked with the site management team to sort of collate their requirements and needs. But then found myself in the usual position, which was that blend of ops and tech. So it went live, there was challenges as there are, and I was out there on the shop floor, as we all do, rolling our sleeves up, getting stuck in, and just supporting, whether that's training them on the system, tweaking the system as we were going, testing it.
And at that point, where were you in the project team? So I assume there's a project manager there for that, that go live. And how did you associate with that person firstly?
Yeah, so I was completely out of the project team. I was more just an operational support. So I was just reporting directly into the site manager at the time. And anything he needed me to do, I would sort of just run off in that direction and
so
support
that was
in that area.
So the GXO site manager at that point.
That was the GXO site, local site manager that was running the shed. But obviously, when it come to big technical changes, or just giving my feedback, that's when I'd then get involved with the wider project team and liaise with the project manager, some of the continuous improvement guys, and build that relationship. And ultimately, that's what it's always been about for me is learning from people. So understanding people that do different roles and what I can learn from them, and trying to take the best bits from everybody around me to try and become the best individual that I could be and progress my career to as far as I feel I can go, or see where I end up. So from there, Ted Baker, and being the small world that we live in, Ted Baker's project manager, which I didn't realize at the time, she was the project manager at Delphi when we were originally going live. Small world. When we were originally going live with the WMS project in Delphi, I met the project manager there. She was then the project manager at Ted Baker, and she spotted that I was then within the operation supporting. And she said to me the one day, she said, look, we're doing, this is just one stage of a huge project for TED on its transformation journey. We're doing an ERP go live. We want to build from scratch a DC in America, and we will need to integrate our new ERP system, which was Microsoft Dynamics at the time. And also we need to integrate with our 3PL in Hong Kong, which was Jodis Wilson. She says, why don't you come and work directly for TED, consult for us? You know how the operation works, you know how the integration and the tech works from a GXO side of things. How can we transfer that to America and to Hong Kong? So I said, yeah, absolutely. I had an interview with the director of logistics at the time at TED. I met the founder at TED, and the rest is history. That's then where my journey started at TED. We then went on a challenging journey with so much transformation going on. I continued that sort of steep learning curve, which is what I love and still love to this day. And slowly but surely picked up more and more responsibility, but then suddenly got to understand the retail side of a business: fashion apparel, wholesale, e-commerce, returns, design, manufacturing, the buying team, the merch team. So it was great. And I spent 8 years at TED, and it felt like 6 months. It went that quickly. And then obviously the challenges that we went through with Brexit, with COVID. We had some stock challenges within TED, which is, known about quite publicly. We had some stock challenges, but with those challenges become experience. You bond closer as a team. You bond more, I think, with your suppliers. So we built this incredible relationship with GXO, with Future Forwarding, who were our provider in America, and with Jodis, and then all the other suppliers around us, from manufacturers to tech providers to logistics and supply chain providers. And without those guys, businesses aren't what they are today, because it takes everybody coming together, I think, to make something really work.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a journey, because there's a big gap between running ops inside a 3PL such as GXO, which is fairly limited in its scale. Usually you might have the warehouse and one element or two elements of the transport, but then to do some consultancy in tech and then suddenly become eventually at least global supply chain director, which is full end to end, that in itself is a challenge, because as you mentioned, there's lots of functions in that role that you're just not exposed to in the 3PL world. So I'm not trying to answer the question, but I mean, that's one challenge. You mentioned already COVID, you mentioned Brexit and a few stock challenges. So throughout that journey from Delphi through to Ted Baker, what would you either your biggest lesson or your biggest challenge, or maybe even your biggest achievement? Maybe they're all the same item. What would you pull out as the one memory that you think you'll take with you?
Surround yourself with the right people. Yeah. I think I stand by that, and I've learnt that at every stage throughout my career to date. If you surround yourself with the right people, you can achieve anything. And even when you get it wrong, that's absolutely fine, because within supply chain and the speed that things change around us, things like the Suez Canal, you remember that. And that almost seems like a minor issue now when you look at what happened with COVID and Brexit. But you can react to it. And even if you react to it but get it wrong, as long as you learn from it and the people around you learn from it, I think that's been my biggest lesson across that journey. Is it's okay to get it wrong, and you will get it wrong. It's just how you deal with that. And as long as you learn from it and try not to make the same mistake again, it's absolutely fine. I mean, if you look at what's going on in the world at the moment, with the uncertainty between Russia and Ukraine, with the stuff that's going on in America, with Donald Trump and China, stuff changes on a daily basis. I don't think there's anybody out there right now that could give you a straight answer as to which direction to go in when it comes to making certain decisions. But you're going to have to go with something. You're going to have to take a punt. So get everyone together, all agree the direction that you want to go in, and then see what happens. And you might be lucky and get it right. You might get it wrong, but you might get it wrong because they change their mind the day after. I mean, if we look at what Donald Trump has just announced with country of origin issue, 1 minute we think the country of origin is where it's being shipped from. Now it's changed potentially, because that's not been confirmed yet either. Potentially now the country of origin is actually where it's manufactured. But there's that much uncertainty sitting in the market at the moment. So I think that's been my biggest learning, is just surround yourself with the right people, agree on a way forward, and go for it, and just react. And I think supply chain is all about reacting. And I think there's more and more businesses now who are pulling certainly the freight function, where it's historically sat within the merchandising and buying team. I think there's more and more businesses now that are pulling that back into the ops team. They've got a seat at the table at board level. And I think that's all stemmed from things like Brexit and COVID and what's going on currently, because people are realizing the value of that knowledge around the table. And I think one of the questions for us all moving forward is, how do we keep that seat at the table, and how do we make sure it stays relevant?
Yeah, I think that's really clear. Certainly from a 3PL background, One of the difficulties we already always had was logistics was always in procurement, and procurement always looked at what's the cheapest and never really saw the real value in supply chain. I think whilst it was traumatic, COVID and certainly Brexit sort of highlighted then the importance of supply chain. So yeah, I mean, I think that's fully backed up, and certainly on the people side as well. I'd fully agree.
And I think touching on that, and for the viewers that are watching, yourself with your, long career within logistics and your long career within DHL. So 18 years, I believe, first 4 years were in the UK. Give everyone
back when I had hair. Yeah.
Back when you had hair and it was less stressful, maybe. And then the rest of your time in Russia, I think, it'd be really interesting to understand from you the challenges you've had and how does the supply chain look different in Russia? Obviously, we know what's happened over the last few years in Russia, and you've obviously moved back to the UK and now you're within supply chain logistics over here. What are the key differences that you've found? And also coming from that 3PL background and a long time in a big corporate company like DHL, that everyone knows DHL, to now working back with customers. You've almost done the reverse to me, haven't you? Where I started consulting, then working for Ted Baker, you've done a long span at a 3PL, and then you've gone to some brands since. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I spent 18 years with DHL, 4 of those in the UK, 14 then in Russia. So I was lucky enough really to meet the right person at the right time who needed someone to go across to Moscow. I was young, free and single at the time. So I jumped at the opportunity, really. I joined DHL, which was previously Excel Logistics, through the graduate scheme. So the graduate scheme was still quite tough, but I had the advantage of being able to be exposed to senior managers. And one of the questions I always asked them was their advice to me in order to grow. And the consistent piece of advice I always had was get some international exposure. So as soon as I had that opportunity, it could have been anywhere, to be honest. It just happened to be Moscow. So I jumped at the opportunity. I moved to Moscow really to be a site manager, contract operations manager, to turn around a project that it was a poor implementation. And for the first 4 years of my time with Excel and DHL, that was my focus, really. Move from project to project to pick up where things were not really running.
And what attracted you to Moscow initially? Was it just a change in career? Was it a bit of traveling? Because obviously some people enjoy that as part of their career.
I think I have a slight sadistic streak that runs through me. I think I sort of like the idea of going to somewhere that was perceived to be a really tough place to go, and I think that was part of the challenge. And as I said, I was young, free, single. I'd always wanted to move and experience something internationally, and that was the first one that came up, and it just happened to be one of the ones that I had my eyes on for a while, just because it was the kind of place nobody would generally think about going. They're looking at Dubai or Miami or somewhere a bit more exotic than the cold grey streets of Moscow as it appeared to me at that time. So I took that opportunity to move across, and it was tough. I have to say, the first 18 months of that project was very tough. Not just because of the contract, and we can speak about all the issues that came along with that contract, many of them tech related as well. Also, the language and the culture was a big difference to the UK. So I went out there for original 2-year secondment. But by the time we turned around that first project, one warehouse, the idea was to grow the business. And I loved it that much. I, in fact, extended and ended up being there 15 years and built my life there, really. Just to come back on the question of what the differences are, it's actually a lot more alike than you'd think, but there clearly are some cultural clashes, and certainly in the way that the people work. What I would say, and need to be careful how I word it, but the Russians need to follow instructions. It's a very autocratic society. It's top down, and you don't really challenge the superior person in a room. And as DHL, we have a more Western view on, as you said, bringing people in, get the communication, the collaboration, what's the best ideas, push them around and move forward. So we still wanted to bring that as DHL, but still had to operate within this autocratic society. And what I will say is, once we've got the SOPs, the work instructions, and everything clearly communicated, clearly written down, by far the most productive workforce I've ever had. They will follow everything rigidly. So, and I think that's the big difference. It's a very top-down dominated hierarchy, and that's very different to what we have over here. Outside that, people are people. They like to go for a drink after work and have good food and enjoy time with their families. So I think there's nothing too dissimilar other than that. From a career point of view, it was a fast track. I would say the organisational is a lot flatter. So I moved at the time. I was working in London for an RDC for trade team as a shift manager. I moved to a contract operations stroke site manager position. So as a shift manager in London, my boss is a ops manager. His boss is a general manager. Then there's a regional manager. Then there's an ops director, and you move your way up. As soon as I moved to Moscow, my boss was the MD. He was reporting into the European MD, and then I'm a global MD. So the structures are a lot flatter.
Yeah.
And because of the troubles that project was having when I was first there, every Friday I was chairing meetings with the European CEO, which was frightening at the time because you just don't know what to expect. But so it was a path of fire, but it was also one that taught you extremely quickly.
So if you could call out a few people along that journey that really supported you and developed your career and sort of gave you that platform to sit around those boardroom tables, do those presentations, and help you end up where you got to, who would you specifically call out?
Probably 2 or 3 people. So I think Simon and Elliot, who's now the supply chain director for GE Healthcare, he was a couple of years ahead of me on the graduate scheme, and he was the one that took me to Moscow, at least introduced me to the MD of Moscow at the time, the MD of Russia, sorry. So without him, I certainly wouldn't have gone to Russia. So I think he's an honourable mention. The person I think I learned the most from was the MD for 8 years of my time in Russia. His name was Nore Kamun. Extremely intelligent guy, very quick thinking, very experienced, very direct with the way he spoke to people. Upset quite a few people with the way he operated, the way he spoke. Actually worked quite well in a Russian structure. His speed of thinking and the way he taught me how to build a story up in a PowerPoint. So a negotiation isn't about, at least in my experience, isn't about getting to a table and having a conversation. It's about how you build up to that. The information you drop in at certain times. You build up a slide deck. You'll build up an email chain. You'll build up phone calls. Everything is connected to building up towards that moment because you're just conditioning people to make sure that when you get into those decision-making moments, the situation and the atmosphere is right in order for you to get the best results. And we also, together, we often played off each other quite well. He would often be the bad cop and I'd be the good cop, or the other way around. And we learned a lot from each other, I think, as well, in terms of how to get the best out of some of those situations in very, very tough discussions as well. So I think Nore is by far the person who taught me the most.
I just want to take a moment to recognise another of our sponsors, Chocolate Cake Media. They're a video production company that works strategically within the logistics world. From 3PLs to transport operations, they create smart video content that solves real problems, helping you build your brand, win more work, and keep your teams engaged. They think differently, plan smarter, and deliver videos that drive real results. Find out more at chocolatecakemedia.co.uk.
And the last person I'll probably talk about is Mel Brockhouse. He was the regional operations manager in the first 4 years of my career in trade team, really. And I didn't really interact with him too much. He was the manager that introduced me to the business. But, he's a regional manager and I was a graduate at that point, moving up to shift manager. So I wouldn't say my interactions with him were very frequent, but they were always quite insightful. And I thought he was the first person that brought me down to earth in the right way, really. So I think, as most people coming out of university, I was very ambitious. I wanted to be the next CEO and all these sorts of things. So every time I met him, he would always ask me, what my experiences so far, where I wanted to go, or I would also push to say, I want to be a site manager next, where you are. And it was only once, and he mentioned it, and I remember it quite often. I haven't used it myself with other people. But his reaction to me when I was pushing, where's my next promotion coming from? Well, take me to the toilet cubicles and show me where your name is. And I said, my name's not written on the toilet cubicles. He said, well, you haven't had enough battle scars then, because if you'd had enough battle scars, your name would be on the inside of the toilet because someone would be writing bad words about you. So when your name's inside, and of course he didn't mean it literally, but he's saying you've got to go through a few battles yet. You need to understand what it's like to run a team of drivers or a team of warehouse drivers, and you're just too baby-faced, which I was at one point. But yeah, and I think that was the cold shower quite early on in my career, and that was one of the reasons, push myself to Moscow, go into those uncomfortable situations, find those moments, find some comfort in discomfort, and know that a little bit like this podcast, really. Do something that's not so familiar. Learn a new skill. It's horrible, but you've got to get through it. And actually, as long as you accept it before you go in, it's a lot less stressful, I would say. So yeah, Mel deserves a shout out because he was the one that grounded me in my ambition, really, and made me learn from the ground up rather than trying to run before I could walk, really. So
I think that's a really
yeah.
good point, isn't it? And it's one of the key themes of this podcast is pushing yourself out of that comfort zone. I know we spoke about it before. I'm well out of my comfort zone doing this, and the viewers that are watching this will know that, and it maybe even comes across, but hopefully it's something that we both become better at over time. And we would certainly welcome more people to come onto the podcast. We want to talk to everyone within business and within supply chain specifically, whether they're pickers, whether they're packers, truck drivers, ferry drivers, you name it. We want to talk to them and understand their challenges. And I think one of your biggest challenges that you've faced throughout your career is then that transition of coming back to the UK. You know, you won't mind me saying you've got a lovely family that you met and brought up in Russia. You've then come back to the UK. What was the biggest challenge you faced with that huge transition of coming out of DHL, leading into what you're doing today, moving your family with you? What was the biggest challenge there? And then obviously moving on to with the situation between Russia and Ukraine, what do you think the biggest challenge is within supply chain, and what's that caused, and how do you feel we're dealing with that? If we start with your family and something a little more personal.
Yeah, I mean, the transition back was, we always spoke about it in Russia as expats. You know, that we, once you've been there a certain period of time, a few years, we always anticipate the move back to the Western world to be difficult because the pace of life and the pace of business is just slower, and that was something that was difficult to get used to. In Russia, everything's quick and has to be done now because at that time it was a growing market, very fast growing market, and things changed every day. Here, things is a bit more mature, it's a bit more stable, and decisions can take a little bit longer. So I think getting used to the pace of life is one element, and also with my family, it was quite a difficult period of time. I moved across first to take my new position here, which we can talk about briefly in a second. My oldest daughter then joined me a short time after. While we were waiting for my wife to get her visa to come, then the Russia-Ukraine war, or SMO, started. And that delayed the whole visa process. So we were separated. I was here with my oldest daughter, my wife with the youngest daughter in Moscow for about 10, 11 months. So, you know, that was quite difficult for just as a family being broken up.
Absolutely,
certainly
yeah.
for the two daughters, only having one parent really to look after, and then myself also having to hold down a full-time job now in a smaller private equity-backed, fast-growing business, whilst also having a daughter at home. So, yeah, that was quite difficult. That's luckily now resolved, and my wife's here on a long-term visa. Hopefully, she'll be a UK citizen at one point soon. So yeah, that was quite difficult. The transition, from a business point of view, I actually didn't find that difficult, to be honest. I think I mentioned earlier, you know, many jobs in this industry that are transferable. I think, you know, I'm managing people, I'm managing inventory, a system, and a process. So my first job back was working for a company called Preventex, which is a home sampling sexually transmitted disease testing company, and I was looking after the laboratory, which clearly working in DHL, I'd never looked after a laboratory before, but many of the functions are exactly the same. Clearly, there's a few technical elements that are different, but we're managing people, we're managing data, we're managing process, and managing inventories exactly the same. All the conversations in the boardroom are similar. They just focus on slightly different things. The speed of the decision is a little bit faster. Cash flow is more important than it is in a larger company, but the reports are the same, and everyone's interested in the same same thing. I then moved to another private equity business, but this is when I start moving into businesses in distress, and the turnaround, which formed my career at the beginning. I've sort of come back to now. I'm now working generally with businesses that are in trouble and need to be turned around. So that's what I started then.
Yeah.
With CTD Tiles, which was eventually bought by Tops Tiles. And that was a very ambitious program to consolidate their network, which we did partially with the help of DHL as well. and now moving into the consultancy world, started the logistics consultancy, supply chain consultancy business, and see where that takes us. And the podcast as well will hopefully be something to teach me a few more skills and see who knows who I'll meet along the way. So yeah, that's really my journey after DHL. Not that much different, to be honest. Just shorter time frames and a slightly faster pace, which almost aligns it back to Russia, where generally the life was faster anyway. So yeah, I think that's it. So just coming back onto what you mentioned earlier, I think it's really key. You know, I've managed a fleet of drivers. I've managed teams of warehouse operatives, but I've never really seen things fully from their perspective. So I think I really like the ideas of speaking to a few drivers, a bit more in depth. Trampers. I've never met a tramper. I've booked loads of trampers in my time, but I don't think I've ever met one. So it'd be interesting to find those guys, get them in here, and see what is their day like. You know, I can't imagine driving to Glasgow and sitting in my cabin waiting for the next job where and whenever it comes. So it'd be really interesting to go into some of those positions just to understand how life looks like from their side, really.
Yeah, 100%. Because I think without everyone pulling together, there is no supply chain, and it only takes one of those sort of dominoes to fall over, and it has a knock-on effect, as we know, on a daily basis. So yeah, I think hopefully the more perspectives we can get for the podcast will be great, and hopefully the viewers at home will enjoy if they haven't already.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just going back on your other question, how has Russia-Ukraine impacted the supply chain? I mean, it's certainly impacted the supply chain in those two countries. I think outside those countries, there's no real direct impact that I can pull on other than slightly longer transit times for any air freight going or rail freight that would have previously gone through Russia. Indirect impacts would be the cost of fuel, clearly, although oil is now coming back to where it was, really heating costs and things. So the general cost of life have gone up. But I wouldn't say there's been any real transformations on the supply chain within Russia. I think that's a bit different, and I've been out of it now for 4 years, so I don't have my hand on the pulse as much as I used to. But I certainly speak to some people there, and in that initial stage where you're just trying to find a method to keep the business going, really, when volumes are going down and all the brands themselves are trying to find a way they can still operate, if they can still operate, and whether they're selling off their businesses and they have to find new sources of goods and raw materials and things. That's fairly complicated, but it's fairly simple from a logistics point of view. You're just finding different points of A and B and trying to work with it. I think the most difficult part of that process was the currency element, with all the sanctions going on, a SWIFT being cut off. Some of the companies I speak to have 30, 40, 50 bank accounts in different currencies, 40, 50 different currencies, just to be able to be paid for the service they were doing. And of course, all the commissions along the path of that took a lot of the profit out of the business. So I know in the first 6 to 12 months, they struggled a lot with just getting payment for the service more than just delivering the service. And we'll try to get some people on from Russia, possibly Ukraine, and a few other places, just to see from their point of view how life has been impacted by
and I
this
think
from their side.
it's a complex world out there, isn't it? And we see that today, and we've touched on some of those points. And I think my eyes were open to just how many brands are out there trying to make a go of this. And obviously, you've got some of the big brands which are very well known, and you see the journey that some of these individuals go on, which is incredible. But for that one success, you don't always see the amount of failures that sit behind it. And I think between the two of us and some of the consultancy that we've done since changing direction in our careers and coming out of sort of full-time roles, whether that be with 3PLs or brands, it's just the vast amount of brands that are there, but the amount of support that those guys need. How do you think those guys can play the market that we're in currently? How do you think they can get the support that they need to help them navigate the challenges that we face, the China and the US challenge, and the tariffs being the biggest one? Because for some of the big companies, they've got the teams of people, they've got the experience, they've got the knowledge. For some of these smaller brands that are trying to make a go of it, where do they get that knowledge from?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think it's quite topical at the moment. One thing I was surprised about coming out of the world of big 3PL logistics And then moving into the private equity world, and then moving into consultancy, is just a sheer amount of these businesses that are starting up, failing, starting up, continuing, or in some sort of phase of development. I can't even think of the number. It must be tens of thousands in the UK alone. So I think, first of all, the sheer number of companies out there was surprising to me. We've spoken about it previously, and I think a good method for them to find that resource, as well as joining chambers of commerce and doing all those sorts of things. The entrepreneurs are normally really passionate about the thing that they're selling or producing or making. They're not really experts in every other element of the business. So here, I think sort of fractional supply chain consultancy is probably a good way for them to start. They can pay something that's more cost effective for them, as well as having a day-to-day person that they can employ to have a senior professional acting maybe as a NED, a non-executive director, or just an advisor 2-3 days a month, sorry, to not only advise based on their technical knowledge of how a system should work and what's possible and what's not possible, to act as a guide for the day-to-day person, but also to bring their network and their contacts, between you and me and all the people we know, whether it's rates or packaging rates, people, whatever you need. If you speak to the right people, you'll be able to pull that in. So I think for smaller companies who can't really afford those global senior supply chain professionals, look for that fractional 3-4 days a week, a month again, where you benefit from all that network that they've built up all the years, their knowledge. They can advise your local day-to-day guy. And I think that's a really good way for them to transition from an SME into a larger player.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really good point. So, Simon's crystal ball, what's next in supply chain? What do you think is going to happen between China and the US? How do you think that's all going to pan out? And the tariffs globally, really.
Yeah.
We won't hold you to it. We'll probably come and revisit this conversation, I have no doubt. But with all your experience, how do you see this playing out?
I think those tariffs will disappear or be removed relatively quickly. I wrote an article on LinkedIn about it not so long ago. I mean, I think it sounds nice, and it worked in the time where the world wasn't as globalized as it is. I forget who Trump always refers back to, but it was a simpler world back then, and also it didn't have the impact I think he thought they had. They also had quite a few negative impacts. So I think it'll take a bit of time. The inflationary impacts on particularly the small businesses, but possibly also some of the larger businesses in the US, that will take its measure in the polls, and he'll be quickly, as he already is, reversing out some of those tariffs. So I would think those tariffs will be factored in and blended into the normal day-to-day within a couple of months. Yeah, I don't see that really having a big impact. It has a big short-term impact, and we're still waiting to understand. I think you mentioned earlier about the de minimis and Section 301 and all the things that are changing in the US. But again, that's technical. We'll get through all that. That won't be too difficult. From an overarching perspective, I don't think much will change.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Simon. I think it's been really interesting to talk about, your background, my background, let the viewers, know a little bit more about ourselves. And I think over the next few weeks and few months, as this podcast continues, we want to talk to as many people within the supply chain as possible and get their perspective on life. What does a day in the life of these people look like? And I think that's what will interest us and interest the viewers that are watching. And don't forget, like and subscribe, comment down below. We'd love to hear your feedback.
Until next time, please keep stacking and keep loading.